What do you like? Tell me what you like.
I love the idea of nourishing both our body and our soul.
Welcome to the Nourishing You podcast presented by the National Association of Nutrition Professionals, NANP. We invite you to join Kristen Burkett and Diana Wally as they host experts from the holistic wellness space who will share practical tips and information to enhance your health and vitality. Kristen and Diana are master nutrition therapists and board certified in holistic nutrition with private practices that support their clients as they strive to reach their full potential. If you enjoy today's show, please help us out by commenting below, liking this video, and subscribing to the channel to help us spread the word.
You have to move your body. That's my message. That's my passion.
This episode of the Nourishing You podcast is brought to you by Standard Process.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Nourishing You podcast, focusing on maternal child health in a three-part series. It's such a pleasure to welcome renowned childhood health expert, Dr. Elisa Song, to the podcast to help us navigate some of the challenges we face today. Dr. Elisa Song, MD, is a Stanford, NYU, UCSF-trained integrative pediatrician, pediatric functional medicine expert, and most importantly, mom to two thriving children. And she is on a mission to revolutionize the future of children's health. Dr. Song is the author of the national bestseller, Healthy Kids, Happy Kids, an integrative pediatrician's guide to whole child resilience. Dr. Song created Healthy Kids, Happy Kids as an online, holistic pediatric resource to help practitioners and parents bridge the gap between conventional and integrative pediatrics with an evidence-based, pediatrician-backed approach. In her integrative pediatric practice, Whole Family Wellness, she's helped thousands of kids get to the root causes of their health concerns and help their parents understand how to help their children thrive, body, mind, and spirit, by integrating conventional pediatrics with functional medicine, homeopathy, acupuncture, herbal medicine, and essential oils. These health concerns have ranged from frequent colds, ear infections, asthma and eczema, to autism, ADHD, PANS and PANDAS, anxiety, depression, and autoimmune illnesses. Dr. Song is chair of A4M's pediatric education and has taught parents and practitioners around the world on integrative pediatric topics for leading educational organizations, including the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, the Institute for Functional Medicine, the Forum for Integrative Medicine for Mental Health, the Holistic Pediatric Association, and many others. Those are just to name a few. She's also been featured in hundreds of top podcasts, print and online media outlets, including the Wellness Mama podcast, Bloom TV, Forbes, Healthline, Mind Body Green, National Geographic, Pop Sugar, Parents, Motherly Parade, Very Well Health, and the New York Post. I'm so honored to introduce you to our audience today, Dr. Song. I don't know how I found you many years ago, but you have been a trusted resource for me as I raised my two kiddos, and I'm truly grateful for that. So if anyone in our audience isn't familiar with you, they're going to be so glad they tuned in today. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's an honor for me to be here. We were talking offline about how NANP is definitely near and dear to my heart, and I love the community, and it's an honor for me to be here speaking with all of you.
Yeah, it is such a pleasure for Kristen and I to talk with a practitioner who genuinely embraces the concept of holistic care, so that body, mind, and spirit approach to the practice of medicine. Before we get into it, we've seen your incredible professional bio. We'd love to know a little bit more about your personal journey into holistic pediatrics, which is definitely a path less traveled, and why you want to revolutionize the future of children's health.
So I would say my story, coming from a conventional pediatric background, is probably a little different than most practitioners who make the leap over into a more integrative world, because many practitioners will find a more holistic approach because conventional medicine has failed them on some level, whether it's a chronic illness that they have themselves or maybe a family member. Knock on wood, that wasn't me. I actually was always interested in a more I wouldn't have called it holistic back then, but even as a kid, just very interested in spirituality and food and how we can really connect the body and the mind. And so when I went to college, it was it with this in mind that I really want to work with children. That was number one. I mean, always my path was working with, it was actually either to be a pediatrician or a veterinarian, which I mean, on some level, kind of, you take care of these amazing little beings that come into the world. And so when I got to Stanford, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, except that I wanted to work with kids. And, as you go through life, you learn to look for signs that are pointing you in the right direction if you pay attention. And, I was all set to actually become a lawyer and a public rights and civil rights advocate and go to Capitol Hill. I spent a summer with the Children's Defense Fund, in Washington, D.C., fighting for poverty rights. And so that was how I thought, envisioned that I would be helping children. And then I realized, well, I'm actually not going to be working with children per se. And it lights me up to be with children and with families. And so I stumbled across this flyer as a junior at Stanford for this convention for the American Holistic Medical Association. Now, mind you, this was back in the late 80s. So holistic medicine wasn't really spoken about that much. And it totally piqued my interest because I came from a conventional medical background. My mom was an OBGYN. And so whatever got in me as a junior to drive myself to the convention center, I went, and my mind was totally blown. I heard from folks who were just starting to get known, like Deepak Chopra and Andrew Weil, Joan Borisenko, and I just thought, wow, is this medicine, right? I mean, because I'd only ever seen the hustle and bustle of my mom with a busy solo OBGYN practice. And so I remember calling my mom. This was on a landline. There were no such things as cell phones back then. And calling my mom and saying, you know what, Mom, I think that I want to be a naturopathic doctor. And she's like, what's that? Which was the common refrain back then. What is that? And so nobody ever discouraged me. I mean, my mom would have supported anything I wanted to do, but they also didn't necessarily encourage that route. And so I thought, well, let me go to medical school. My eyes are a little open now. This sounds like this is something I could actually be interested in. And so that um, drive has really informed medical school, where I started the American Medical Student Association Holistic Medicine chapter in my med school. Still an advocate at heart. I also, was chair of the legislative branch, and we did lobbying and all of that. And even through residency, that was with the goal in mind. Now, residency was another eye-opening experience where you're just busy. You're putting out fires. It's a ton of very necessary Band-Aid medicine. But I just kept seeing kids coming in, sicker and sicker, and we weren't really helping them to get, quote, well, right? And, what was considered to be preventive medicine was really not preventive medicine. It was more just get kids in and out, make sure they're gaining weight appropriately, that their height is increasing, they're reaching their milestones, and that's kind of it. But what about helping proactively to help them thrive, right? And so even in residency, I just thought there's got to be something more, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. But again, the right teacher comes at the right moment, and I saw this food as medicine flyer, and again, that concept. Again, this is in the late 90s. Like, what is that? So then I drove myself to Berkeley, and attended this conference. And it was sponsored by the Center for Mind Body Medicine with James Gordon. If you know who he is, he's fantastic. And I heard from a very young Mark Hyman for the first time. And I just thought, whoa, okay, food can actually change the direction of your health, and this idea of functional medicine. So then I was hooked, and that's where I just did all of the education that I could. I mean, you never stop learning. I mean, you should be a forever student, but that was kind of my foray into this. So it's informed really how I started my practice back in 2004.
Wow. So just that you were so open to those signs, like if there's anything, like Diana and I both have kids in college right now or around that age. And if we can just instill in them, just be open, just know that anything could change your mind and be your direction if you're just open to it. So I just love that you took that and you had that heart moment, and we're just so grateful that you did, because you brought so much to this world. But so that's a really interesting story. That's great.
My son likes to remind me, because as you know, you of course you never stop learning, and life's lessons, hopefully you can impart them to your children on some level. But I remember at one point I had told him what the definition of luck means, and it was kind of around St. Patrick's Day, right, where we're talking about the luck of the Irish. And I remember telling him, Bodhi, really, luck, when you say, oh, you're so lucky, luck is when opportunity meets preparation, right? Or when preparation meets opportunity. I did not say that, and I don't know who said that, but it is so true. When you're ready to, of course you work hard, and you have to have a mission and a passion, but then when something comes in front of you that's this amazing opportunity, you also have to be ready to leap, because that's when we can really do our best and do our best for the world.
So good. How old are your children?
Well, they're not little kids anymore. My daughter's 15, so she's a freshman in high school as we speak, and my son is 13, so he'll be a freshman next year. So we're in that officially in the teen stage, but they're amazing. I mean, they're still, I would say they're kind of, I mean, I don't like to say naive or younger, because it almost puts a negative connotation to it, but they definitely are still very, I guess, bright-eyed and, really enthusiastic about the world. So I'm hoping that stays.
Do they have
That's
any
awesome.
desire, or have they mentioned maybe wanting to follow in your footsteps and do similar work? Are they there
I
yet?
don't, they're not there yet. They have not found their thing, besides soccer.
Oh, there you go.
So just soccer is their thing right now. So we'll see. I'm just, we're watching that unfold.
Oh, awesome. All right. So, something that you've noted really stood out in my mind, but you noted that in 2005, the New England Journal of Medicine predicted for the first time in history that our kids are expected to have shorter lifespans than us, their parents. I mean, that's just startling. And now, 20 years later, nearly 1 in 2 kids have a chronic condition. It seems like the health of our future is at a really critical juncture, because our kids are the future. So can you just begin with us today, telling us your thoughts as to why things have evolved this way? What's happening? What is changing?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many confluent factors, but the fact that, this is now 20 years ago that our kids were expected to have shorter lifespans than their parents for the first time ever in history. I mean, we've never been at this place before, where our kids are expected to not live as healthy and long lives as us. I mean, this is despite all of our quote medical advances, right? And for practitioners, if you've been around as long as I have, I mean, I finished my pediatrics residency in 2000. There was a time when there was no such thing as type 2 diabetes. When I was in training, it was called adult onset diabetes. Our kids didn't get type 2 diabetes. They may have gotten juvenile, right? Juvenile autoimmune type 1 diabetes, but really this explosion of metabolic and hormonal disorders and blood sugar dysregulation. This is precisely what a lot of patients will come to nutrition practitioners for help with. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. There wasn't even a term for that. I mean, it's mind-boggling that kids are getting this, right? And then the explosion in mental health concerns. I mean, this is for me with my teenage daughter. I'm keenly aware of the fact that 1 in 3 teenage girls nowadays has seriously thought of suicide, at some point. And 1 in 4 in surveys has actually come up with a plan. And so that could be my daughter, or that could be any one of her friends. And so, really trying to understand what is it in our modern world that is really having all of this synergistic impact on our kids' health negatively. And we have to go way back, I think, to really, even before kids are born. We can really tie so much of the trajectory of our kids' health by how their microbiome is shaped, their gut microbiome from, really from preconception, if we have the opportunity, through pregnancy, and from the moment that they're born. And that is exactly why I wrote my book, because if you'll notice in the little blue burst, it says why your child's microbiome holds the key to lifelong wellness, which is 100% for our children and also for our adults as well. But when we think about the fact that in the past 40, 50 years, where we've had this explosion of chronic disease in children and for adults, our genes have not changed from an evolutionary standpoint. Right? Genes don't change that quickly. So what has changed are the epigenetic influences on how our genes come out and express themselves as signs of wellness or disease. And in those early stages of life, your child's microbiome has the major influence on how those epigenetic shifts occur. In fact, the state of your child's microbiome can influence whether or not they have an increased risk of mental health disease later on in life, whether or not they develop any number of increasing allergic diseases like eczema, asthma, anaphylactic food allergies. That's another thing. When I was in residency or medical school, I hardly remember writing a prescription for an EpiPen for kids. And now 1 in 12 to 1 in 13 kids has anaphylactic life-threatening food allergies. So things have shifted dramatically, and we can really tie that to some of the studies that indicate how significant microbiome disruption is. Go back to really looking at that infant stage. And one very large study, and this now, I remember in 2016 when this study came out, I thought, oh my gosh, we all need to know this as parents, as practitioners, as OBGYNs, right, as pediatricians. Still not very well known. But this large study, nearly 800,000 children, looked at infants from 0 to 6 months of age who received antibiotics or antacid medications and followed them for the first several years of life, and found that those children who received these medications had a significantly increased risk, nearly double the risk of developing virtually every single allergic disease by the time they were 4 years of age: eczema, asthma, allergies, hives, anaphylactic food allergies. We also know from a very large Finnish study, this is nearly 1 million births that were followed, and looked at antibiotic exposure in children from birth, on, and found that children who are exposed to antibiotics, even in utero antibiotics while moms are pregnant, had a significantly increased risk of developing mental health concerns by the time they were older kids or teenagers, increased by up to 50%. The risk was highest when the antibiotic exposure was before 6 months of age, and the more rounds of antibiotics, the higher the risk. Now, I always need to pause here because there are a lot of moms who are going to be listening who are thinking, oh my gosh, well, my kids had antibiotics when they were little, and now they have eczema or they have ADD or they have anxiety. And could that be why? Well, it, we can't ever go back in time and change what's happened. And that it's really important to know that we can't go back and say, what if? Okay. I know as moms, we do that. and my own kids, both my children had antibiotics when they were under 5 weeks of age. Right. And this was even for me as an integrative pediatrician. It's not to say don't ever have the antibiotics, because sometimes they are absolutely necessary. Many times not, but you have to, trust on some level. And then understanding the impact of the downstream impact of the disruption to their microbiome on their developing gut immune system connection, gut brain connection, gut hormone connection. So now, as we look back, and your child may have attention concerns, depression, may have immune concerns, autoimmunity. Yes, those antibiotics may have played a role, but now you know to look at their gut microbiome, right? As opposed to before, no, you might never have thought to look at their gut and say, could this be a gut immune problem, a gut hormone problem, a gut brain problem? So the awareness now is, okay, let's start looking at your gut microbiome and how do we repair any disruption that's occurred, because it's never too late. And more importantly, how do we start to build that foundation of microbiome resilience so that your child or your teenager or your young adult child can thrive no matter what happens?
There's a lot to dig into there, but maybe we could just rewind real quickly and explain to our listeners, what is the microbiome? Everybody's talking about it. You've obviously been on the forefront of this conversation. But yeah, what is it? Is it can we get it from our mother? Is there I understand that there could be issues related to cesarean births, versus vaginal birth, and then obviously with in the kiddo develops their microbiome. So yeah, give us a little bit of background there before we talk about how we can improve it and what to look at and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So the microbiome is really its own ecosystem, and we actually have microbiomes all over us that are unique. Our skin has its own microbiome. Our heart has its own microbiome. Our gut has its own microbiome. Women's vaginal microbiomes are unique. Even their breast milk gland microbiomes, their mammary microbiomes are unique. We have microscopic ecosystems in and on us. The gut microbiome is the most well studied, and it's our largest microbiome, and it has a huge impact on our children's and frankly for us as adults, how our health plays out. Um, the microbiota are the microorganisms that live in the microbiome, right? So the microbiome is actually all of these trillions, hundreds of trillions of microscopic organisms that are living in this microbiome, in this ecosystem, and all of the genes that they bring with us. In fact, our microbiome's genome, genetic material, has been called our second genome, right? Our epigenome. Just like our gut is often referred to as our second brain, it's sort of this command control. And I would actually say, well, our gut microbiome probably is more like our first brain and probably more like our first epigenome, because they are some of our first encounters with our outside world. I mean, we're one long hollow tube, right? And whatever foods or environmental toxins that we're exposed to or infections that we're exposed to have to go through our microbiome, and our microbiome decides what to do with that information. It's all information, right? And so if there's something that's passing through that shouldn't, like, let's say mm, a virus or an environmental toxin, our microbiome and the organisms in it should help to clear it away and protect us, right? And also, if there's something beneficial, like phytonutrients, all those colors, in foods and fruits and vegetables and spices and fiber that we eat, all of these amazing plant-based foods that feed our microbiome, our microbiota takes that information and creates all of these healthful compounds that we use to sustain our health in our life. And so our microbiome, its job is really to take care of us and to help us thrive, as long as we in turn take care of them, right? And kids, the analogy I'll share with kids is, kids from the time they're in preschool learn. I mean, we're coming up on Earth Day soon as we're recording, and they learn to take care of the ecosystem around us, to reduce, reuse, recycle, and all the things, because if we don't, our world's ecosystem will no longer be able to sustain us, right? It's the very same idea with our gut microbiome, except that it's a microscopic ecosystem. But its job is to take care of us and help us grow and help us thrive. And if we don't take care of our internal gut microbiome, that ecosystem will no longer be able to sustain ourselves, our brains, and our immune systems in the way that we would like to. So that can help frame for kids and for adults, for that matter, how why we're doing the things that we're doing and how we should be doing them, because it's not just for us, it's for the friends in our tummies. Right? We're not just eating for ourselves, we're eating and living and breathing in a way that nurtures our microbiome, so our microbiome can nurture us.
So that is it's a great concept and a great way to share that with kiddos. But one thing that struck me while you're saying that is, my mother and my grandmother, my great grandmother, as long as I knew her, nobody had to talk about nurturing our microbiome because
Hmm.
it just kind of naturally happened. What do you think is changed that we actually have to be consciously thinking now of protecting our gut microbes and supporting them to help us rather than just
Yeah.
taking care of our body?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And, really in terms of thinking about how we set our microbiomes up from the start, there is an impact on how we're born, right? Cesarean babies tend to have different microbiomes than vaginally birthed babies. Breastfed babies have different microbiomes than formula-fed babies because breast milk and being vaginally birthed and exposed to your mom's natural microbiome helps support the development of a healthy microbiome in your baby. Now, but that really relies on mom having a healthy microbiome, right? And a lot of moms, what we're finding is, even for babies who were born vaginally and 100% breastfed and never had antibiotics, they're still developing problems, right? Maybe at a lower rate. We know that C-section increases the risk. Formula feeding increases the risk for things like allergies and eczema later on, right? Um, but what is it that's changed in kind of our generation of mothers and our children? Because we didn't see a lot of these same problems in our mothers who are our children's grandmothers and our great grandparents, right? And really and truly microbiomes have changed. But the exposure to what I call in the book microbiome mischief makers, I mean, there's so many disruptors to our gut microbiome today that we face that our generations past did not face. When we're thinking about food and the way that food has become so ultra processed, and so sort of chemically designed to change our brain, patterning so that the food's more addictive. Many of the food additives that are put into foods to make foods taste, sweeter, saltier, have the mouthfeel that we want, um, are shown to directly harm the gut microbiome, trigger something called leaky gut, which many listeners are probably familiar with, and also gut dysbiosis, which is a disruption of the beneficial bacteria, the probiotics in your gut, with the non-beneficial pathogenic bacteria in your gut, right? But it's not just that. We mentioned antibiotics. Antibiotics are one of the most immediate disruptors of our gut microbiome. And we are now at the point where the overuse and misuse of antibiotics is taking us to a place where by 2050, some experts are projecting that antibiotic resistance is going to be a leading cause of death worldwide. And so we have that from a public health perspective, but from this child in front of us, where we know that in some studies up to 70% of antibiotics are inappropriately prescribed for children, it's not just a benign, oh, it's just an antibiotic. I mean, my mom was an OBGYN, and back then you threw antibiotics at everything. Every little cold, oh, take an antibiotic. Every little sore throat, even if it wasn't strep, take an antibiotic. Well, now we know there are many, maybe not immediate, but long-term consequences that can ripple out that stem from the disruption to the gut microbiome, because antibiotics don't just kill the bad bacteria. They're going to go ahead and kill much or even all of the good bacteria in your gut microbiome. And so we have to be aware of judiciously using antibiotics as prescriptions, antibiotics in our food. That's a major problem as well, right? Um, Antibiotics in our soil. And what do I mean by that? Well, glyphosate, which is Roundup, it's a herbicide that's sprayed on non-organic foods to keep the pests away. Well, glyphosate was initially patented as an antimicrobial. So it kills all the beneficial bacteria and the yeast in our soil that's needed to make all of the nutrients for those plants to soak up and really get into our food. So then our food becomes less nutrient dense. And at the same time, we eat some of those compounds when we're eating non-organic foods. And glyphosate has been found in the human gut microbiome to preferentially kill some abnormal bacteria, some beneficial bacteria like our lactobacillus and bifidobacteria probiotics, and preserve pathogenic bacteria like C. diff. And so, we have that. We have environmental toxins. I mean, many of us are aware that these forever chemicals and hormone disruptors, endocrine disrupting chemicals are everywhere, microplastics. Well, there was one article that really kind of hit home. Why do these endocrine disruptors, they have many more effects than just on our hormones. They affect children's developing brains, mental health, immune systems, increase the risk for autoimmunity. There's clearly more than just a hormone disrupting effect. Well, almost every environmental toxin that you can look at is known to disrupt the microbiome. And when we see that the microbiome has all these impacts on every single organ system in our body, we should really be calling these endocrine disrupting chemicals microbiome disrupting chemicals, right?
Yeah.
And then we have, psychological stress, which can trigger leaky gut within an hour, which, our kids and adults are facing, this crisis of lack of stress tolerance and stress overload, right? And so you can think, as I'm rattling all of these things off, because it's not just, and when I think about antibiotics, well, there's also other disrupting medications like birth control pills and antidepressants and antihistamines and steroids. And how many of our kids have been on multiple of these? So it can seem overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, our microbiome doesn't have a chance, right? And yet at the same time, when we understand these factors, we can do things to mitigate and reduce our exposures. And most importantly, it helps us to understand why we want to create that foundation of microbiome resilience. And I call it making microbiome magic every day. If we do that for our kids and for our families and our young adult kids, and they learn how to take care of their microbiomes so that their microbiomes can bounce back after a round of antibiotics, can bounce back after, a really stressful finals week, or it can bounce back after, flying across 3 time zones and, the
Yeah.
stress that has on your body and your microbiome. Your microbiome wants to bounce back to the state that it was in before the disruption. And it will naturally do that if we lay those foundations down. And those foundations, we actually we have the control over. We have power over. We have power over what we eat and how we sleep and how we choose to move our bodies and how we choose to manage stress and hydrate. And so all of those things, if we learn how to do those things in a way that supports a healthiest microbiome, we can thrive. And that's really the most important message, that we can empower ourselves and our kids to do this despite living in this modern world that seems to have everything against us.
There are many supplement companies, but only one Standard Process, a pioneer in whole food nutrition since 1929. Though much has changed in that time, their dedication to farm, family, and innovation remains as strong as ever. The vast majority of the raw plant ingredients used in their products are grown on their 850-plus acre certified organic farm in rural Wisconsin, located just a mile from their headquarters, which helps them ensure quality from seed to supplement. While others in the industry have become multinational entities funded by private equity, Standard Process remains family-owned under the fourth generation of leadership. Only at Standard Process can you find a practitioner-focused partner with more than 300 products that are designed to change lives for people and pets.
I can't wait to talk about microbiome magic. But I just had a really practical question that popped into my head for parents that are listening. So I think your number was about 70% of antibiotic prescriptions might not be necessary. How would a parent know when they're with their child, at their physician's office? How are there a few questions they could ask their physician to find out, if it's really necessary, obviously being respectful to the physician, but how would one navigate that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that is really a bit shocking, right? When the
Mhm.
majority of antibiotics prescribed for our children can be inappropriately prescribed, because most of our kids are when they become acutely sick, it's usually with a viral infection, and antibiotics don't do anything for viruses. And I completely understand that when your child is sick and they're uncomfortable and they have a fever and you want to do something, your doctor wants to do something. So sometimes the easiest thing to do is, okay, let's try the antibiotic and see if it helps. Now that would be okay if antibiotics had no other impact, right? But we know that that antibiotics, even for adults, we know that after a round of antibiotics, adults have an increased risk of developing anxiety or depression subsequently, right? So this is not just a kid phenomena. So we don't want to think of antibiotics as, oh, I'll just take it. It's not going to do any harm. It can do benefit, but you're right. We want to know when it's really necessary. And if you don't have an integrative pediatrician or practitioner to work with, it can be really hard. And as a mom, the last thing you want to do is be second guessing whether you're doing the right thing for your kids, right?
Yeah.
I mean, especially when they're sick. So I actually did write, this is such an important issue. I wrote a whole chapter in my book called What Every Parent and Practitioner Should Know About Antibiotics. Now, I list 6 questions in there as a parent that you can bring to your pediatrician. And sometimes it's not your pediatrician. Sometimes it's the emergency room doc, or it's, the urgent care, physician assistant, or whomever is prescribing, right? Now, the first question is really the most important question. And it's a very simple question, but simply asking, and as you said, in a um, in a partnership way, that you want to really work with this provider in doing the best thing for your child and for them, the patient in front of them. Just asking, hey doc, is this prescription really necessary? Now, it sounds like a really simplistic question, but it's actually not, because in some studies, they found that physicians are twice as likely to write a prescription for an antibiotic, even if they thought it wasn't necessary, if they believe that the patient wanted it, right? And in a busy, ER where you have like 50 patients in the waiting room, and, you're literally thinking, oh my gosh, I have like 2 minutes with each patient. And I've been in that situation where you're just like, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to even stop to get a drink of water? Right. And so by asking that question, you are letting this physician know or practitioner know that you are not one of the moms who's come in simply to get an antibiotic prescription, because there are moms like that, not moms who are listening to this podcast, right? Not practitioners who are listening to this podcast, but there are still moms who aren't aware, and or dads or grandparents or whomever, who aren't aware that antibiotics are not going to help in most situations. And in fact, um, even if they do help, need to be supported, to reduce the long-term impact. So asking that question, um, ideally, you would ask also, and your practitioner would know, well, what are some options while we're waiting, to see if antibiotics are necessary. If your child comes in with a sore throat, absolutely getting a throat culture and confirming that it is strep before starting antibiotics is very important. Number one, because with strep throat, I always want to treat with antibiotics. That is one of the indications where I don't want to mess around with other treatments. I may use supportive homeopathy and herbs, but I really want to make sure the strep is gone. But also, there are many, many, many viruses that can cause uh, worse looking throats and more painful throats than strep throat can. And so knowing whether it's Epstein-Barr or Coxsackie, which is a hand, foot, and mouth virus, or, can help, okay, I don't need antibiotics, but here are some things I can do. And in part 4 of my book, I list for the top 25 most common childhood conditions like fevers, earaches, sore throats, things like that. I do have indications on when you should go see your doctor, when antibiotics may be necessary, and then also, really importantly, all the different natural remedies that you can use that I have used in my practice over the past 20 years and used for my own children, including what homeopathic medicines, what herbal medicines, what diet and lifestyle factors, essential oils, acupressure points. What can you do? As a mom in the middle of the night when your kid's sick and crying, to help them feel better without suppressing their symptoms and help them get better faster, because that is the beauty of natural medicines, that they really can help get your child better faster. And we just, it can take some time to build that confidence, but it can definitely come.
Man, what a great resource. I'm wishing I had that one a few years ago. But you did generously share a lot of things in a different way before you had your book. But I'm going to be recommending that to a lot of my clients with young children now. Fantastic. I want to go further on something that you touched on, but I want to go backwards first, because I just wanted to bring one point out, because it's something that I find with my clients quite frequently is when you talked about glyphosate and the impact of that on the microbiome, and how non-organic food is, typically sprayed with glyphosate or has glyphosate incorporated. A lot of people, I think, do not understand the difference between non-GMO and organic. And I have a lot of people who think, well, I go to the health food store and I buy this brand of crackers or cookies for my kiddo, and they think they're doing something better for them because it's non-GMO, but it's not organic. And so they're still having this effect on the body and the gut, thinking that they're doing something better. And so I just wanted to highlight the distinction that non-GMO does not mean it's not sprayed. It's a very different thing. And so being mindful of those types of brands that are trying to get you to think that this is a healthier version is probably not the case. And so organic really is a distinction there that we need to watch out for.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just want to circle back.
Well, that, and to that point, I mean, it's not necessarily the reality for most families to be home cooking everything from scratch and really having a diet completely of unprocessed foods. And really, I mean, when we bake something, we're processing it, right? I mean, that it's just minimally processed. So helping families understand how to move towards a whole foods, unprocessed and minimally processed diet is so key. And I talk to parents and practitioners about the fact that what I truly believe are the two most important life skills that we can teach our kids as they head off to college or the real world and are making all of these decisions for themselves. The two things, number one, is really how to be very, very savvy food label readers. So, and I call it, reading food labels like a gut hero, but understanding all the components on not to get tricked by front of the package marketing techniques, and really understanding how to read the labels to know that what you're putting in is really food that is going to nourish you and your microbiome. And then number two, how to regulate your nervous system. And that has a direct tie into your microbiome. But really those two skills, if we can help our kids understand that, and I'm at this place right now for my teenagers, they're going downtown with their friends. It's a whole new world. Once your kids get older, when they're in preschool or elementary, you have complete control over what goes in their lunchbox, what goes on their plate. Once they're in late middle school, high school, all bets are off, right? So you want to be having these conversations with them, even when they're little, and not in a way that is, oh, this is good and this is bad, but first educate them. Like, why are we taking care of our little friends in our tummies? And then as you're going to the grocery store, which is not going to be that often. I know when my kids were little, I would going to the grocery store alone was one of my best, like, most calming moments of like, and not having to have these little hands and keep on and constantly saying, no, we're not going to have that. But as you do bring them and showing them, wow, did you see? Okay, let's look at this label. This word, it says artificial, right? If they reach for those like rainbow striped, unicorn fruit roll-ups, right? And you can talk to them about, well, what does artificial mean? And some of them will know, some of them won't. But you can, if they know, they may say, that's fake. Like, well, would you want to eat fake food? Like, would you eat that fake apple in your cooking set? And so really educating them about what that means. And as they get older, kids are so savvy nowadays, and they go online and they research all these things. So having them, if they don't know what an ingredient is, point them to different websites, point them to the environmental working group, point them to different websites, educate them. In my book, I have a whole list of, these food additives that we want to keep out, so that they know when they're going to Trader Joe's or, to Safeway or, wherever they're shopping, that they can choose packaged foods that they still like, that still help them, quote, fit in with their friends when they're all going out for a snack or a drink, right? But that they know and are going to be still nourishing, or at least not harmful, right? Help them make those savvier decisions. And it does stick. I mean, of course, sometimes they're going to make the decisions that we cringe at, but that's a part of learning, right?
Yeah.
And that's a part of helping them recognize, well, how do you feel after you have that blue dye, you know, fiery, what Cool Ranch Takis thing, right? How did you run at soccer, right? What was your mood like? What do you think? And could that be from the food that you ate? And just helping them connect the dots so that they can make more informed decisions.
That is
Yeah.
such good advice. Everybody needs to re-listen to that. And I know, I don't know about you ladies, but like we definitely had some, maybe some like fast food wrappers in our outdoor trash can when our kids were in high school and could drive around, and get their own stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But like now I feel like my proudest parenting moments, not even like, Mom, I got an A on my exam, but when they'll text me a picture of their beautiful like salmon dinner that they made or their avocado toast. I'm like, yes, it's not like it's
Exactly.
in every meal, but at least it's, something.
It
Well,
is
it's
worth the
my
effort,
moment
and
too.
it's about instilling, education and empowerment without being judgmental, which is it's
Exactly.
tough. It's really tough, right? I get it, but and I have had moments where I'm like, okay, that is so gross. We're not putting that in the cart, right? um, but the payoffs are huge. I mean, I see it in my teenagers too. It will come back.
Yeah.
It will come back.
Yes,
It does. It's hard to watch the dip, I have to admit, but it's really fun to see it come back on the other
it's
side
so
because they
good.
have the foundation there.
Yeah.
But so I love this concept of gut hero. I think that could be a term that everyone can embrace and take hold of and use in their day-to-day life. And I would love, like, as we are kind of starting to get to a wrap-up point here, because we're going to be running out of time, I would love for you to just, you mentioned nervous system regulation, and I don't think that's talked about anywhere or much at all, especially with our teens, but it's such a critical area. Can you just expand on that a little bit before we
Yeah.
get to our ending questions?
Well, I will say this was nervous system regulation or dysregulation, I should say, is probably one of the most insidious chronic factors in the disruption to our kids and our own microbiomes. And I want to tie in that gut brain piece, or that gut vagus nerve piece, because it has more to do than just with the brain. So we've all had experiences of being in fight or flight. And in fact, most of us are in fight or flight throughout much of the day, right? You're late to work, or you have a deadline, or someone texted you something really mean, or you see something awful on social media. I mean, it's all these things, right? And that fight or flight response, a heightened stress response, it's simply a physiologic response to getting ready for something. It's a natural response, and it's a normal response to stressors. I mean, it evolved, right? And we think about the proverbial saber-toothed tiger. When there's a saber-toothed tiger coming at you, you bet we want that fight or flight to kick in, and we have to make a decision subconsciously, right? We have no control over it, right? It's just that nowadays, and when the saber-tooth tiger is gone, then our nervous system should reset and be balanced by the parasympathetic rest, digest, and restore state, right? So there's this balance here between the sympathetic fight or flight. Then when that's done, the stressor is gone, our parasympathetic kicks in, and we get back to rest, digest, restore, be in a nice, calm, regulated state. The problem nowadays is, we're constantly up here in the sympathetic state. And maybe we go down a little bit when the deadline's over, or okay, we got to work on time, right? Or the kids are at their tournament on time. But we never really, most of us, go down to a truly restorative state. We're still kind of ready for the next stressor. We're on high alert, right? We're jumpy. We're kind of like, what's next, right? And so when our sympathetic nerve is activated and our vagus nerve is losing its steam, right? I mean, for lack of a better way of saying it, it's losing its muscles, right? We're not working it out every day. What happens then is we can see this vagus nerve dysfunction through something called heart rate variability. And a lot of people nowadays are familiar with HRV because it's measured on your Apple Watch, if you have an Apple Watch. Or like I wear an Aura ring. So there are wearables, right? Like an Aura ring or a Whoop that will measure HRV. Now, what is HRV? HRV, heart rate variability, is a normal state where in a healthy state and our vagus nerve is working well, our heart rate should vary with our breath. A very simple way of saying it, but if you find your pulse, and I'll have parents and kids just in the office just kind of feel their pulse, or as I'm listening to them, breathing in and out, I'm listening to the lungs, but I'm also listening to their heart. Because when we're calm and we take a deep breath in, our heart rate should speed up. And as we are exhaling, our heart rate should slow down. When we're in a stress state, our heart rate does not have a lot of variability. It's just fast and steady. Same. Okay. And so that's what our Oura Ring, our Apple Watch is measuring. What we found is improved heart rate variability in children and also for adults can improve microbiome diversity independent of diet, which is fascinating. Now, I'm not saying that you can eat all the junk food you want to and just, meditate your way out of it. But really, it's so powerful, right? And the same reverse happens. When we're dysregulated, heart rate variability is not optimal. That can directly result in gut disruption, right? And then all of those, when we think about, the stress response and psychological stress, we can no longer separate the mind from the body, right? There is a reason physiologically why people who have more stress and anxiety and trauma in their lives have a significantly increased risk of multiple chronic diseases, right? And when we understand that the connection between the vagus nerve and the microbiome, and then the microbiome's impact on all of our organ systems, we can see why it's so important to target the microbiome and also our nervous system regulation. Those, like I said, those two things, if we can get a handle on that. And, one of the easiest things to do, and the vagus nerve and nervous system regulation is so important. It's kind of like antibiotics. I also have a whole chapter on that in my book, right? It's that important. But there's so many ways that we can engage our vagus nerve and teach our children how to do that are also completely free, right? And I don't even call it mindfulness, mind-body medicine anymore. I call it vagus nerve work. This is a prescription for your vagus nerve, right? And that prescription might include walking in nature, learning how to breathe with your diaphragm. Belly breathing is the most important way I think that we need to learn every day to, when the stress is gone, let's slow it down and learn how to breathe with our diaphragm for a minute or two, reset, restore, and then go about the rest of our day. And we can teach our kids how to do that anywhere, right? When they're getting ready for a test and they're anxious, or, really like so anxious before a baseball tournament or whatever it is, right? And they don't have to look any different. We have to breathe anyway. We might as well learn how to breathe in a way that can reset our nervous system.
When they think about the stimulation for kids now, like even when they are quote unquote resting, they're scrolling on their phones,
Yep.
right? And they're getting constant Snapchats or whatever's coming in. You think of how much firing is going on constantly in a rest state that can be disrupting this, along with everything else in life that's thrown at them. Um, I can see why this is just so important. Where, in the past generations, when you went to rest, you'd go sit down and read a book, or you would do something that was truly calming, right? You
That's
weren't
right.
still stimulated. So it's a fascinating concept that we really have to be aware of in a different way.
For sure. Do you have time, Dr. Song, for one more quick question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So there's one more concept we wanted to touch on before we let you go that's near and dear to our hearts as nutrition professionals, and that's the health equity is nutrition equity concept. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah. And this is important. In fact, one of my talks on epigenetics and our epigenetic futures, that's actually my last slide, because we cannot have a world where our kids are our future and are going to thrive if we don't have the right nutrients to help them grow and thrive. I mean, bottom line, it's just like when you think about, raising a tomato plant in your backyard, you can't just throw the seeds there and leave it alone and neglect it and think, oh, it's going to become this beautiful tomato plant. If we want our children's brains and their bodies and their immune systems to thrive, they need to have the right phytonutrients, the right vitamins, the right minerals, the right sunshine, the right love, and all of those things. And so if we want to get to a place where we see that all of our kids have an opportunity to thrive, have this ability to, make the most of the education they're given, the life that they're given. And I understand there's so many factors that go into, feeling safe and having safe schools and, all and safe communities. But if we don't have the food to nourish their brains and their bodies, um, it's just going to be so much more of an uphill battle to get to a place where we have equity. And it's not, when we think about food deserts. I mean, during the pandemic, I mean, it was just so many food deserts came to light where kids just simply were not getting enough food, period. Right.
Mhm.
But we also know that in most food deserts, they are also simultaneously food swamps, where it's not just that there's not enough food to eat, but the food that is there is just the loaded ultra processed foods, that then are, sort of a double whammy to their future health. And so, really working with schools to, be able to have gardens or educate on, buying different, if there's a choice between, A and B packaged foods, which one would be the better choice, even if they're not both ideal, right? Knowing that frozen fruits and vegetables that are organic are a great choice, even if, fresh organic produce isn't available to you. And in fact, can sometimes even be more nutrient dense than the fresh or fresh produce because it's picked at the height of ripeness and then flash frozen, right? So really, we want to make sure that having healthful food is not just something that requires a very large income and living in an extremely privileged environment,
Yeah.
right? And so, just really figuring out what practical ways we can do that for our families and for our schools. If we can work with the schools, that's amazing.
Do you have any other suggestions if we have people out there that want to get more involved, maybe on a more national scale or maybe just in a bigger way? I think the schools are a great place to start. But are there other movements or things out there that you're aware of that people might look into?
There is, gosh, I can't remember what the name of the organization is, but Dr. Robert Lustig did start an organization, or he is part of a nonprofit, I think called Real Food, that helps to bring kitchens, gardens into schools and educate. So that would be one organization to look into. Um, the during the pandemic, I was fortunate enough to be able to, as you were mentioning, I mean, I did a lot of education during the pandemic, and so was able to, through the proceeds of that education, donate to No Kid Hungry. But they're not, I don't know that No Kid Hungry is necessarily focused on, food education. I mean, that's what we really want, right? Nutrition education. Um, I think, I do think that, and not everyone has it in them to work on a larger policy level. I think if you do, that's amazing. And I love that sort of thing. But working on the local grassroots level, I think if we have enough of us, that's where the movement really happens, because that's as we vote with our dollars and and manufacturers realize, okay, these products that are, just really like junk for your body and your brain, consumers are no longer demanding, things will shift. I mean, we're seeing some shift in the food industry right now, but I mean, I just the food industry bottom line is not going to do anything that's going to lose them money, right?
True.
And so, we have to make sure that we are all voting with our dollars, and educating our kids. I mean, with my kids, and part of the inspiration for the book was I developed a 6-week curriculum and an elective for my daughter's third and fourth grade combined class, and I called it Healthy Belly, Happy You. And we did, I mean, all of these things from Microbiome Magic. I mean, I taught them in this 6-week course, and they loved it. And they were going home, and I had parents texting me saying, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe Johnny like read the label and said, 'Mom, this has too much added sugar in it,'" or was being a little bit more mindful, even in third and fourth grade. And so my son is in 8th grade this year, and I mean, second child, he doesn't, get the same necessarily. And so he asked if I could do it again for his class. So this was a totally different experience teaching these 7th and 8th graders. I loved it. Oh my gosh, their brains were so ready. And they just and their the aha moments when they connected the dots between, different kinds of foods, whether they were ultra processed or not, and their own goals. And so, that's where we really start to make change, because then these kids are going to make different purchasing decisions, who will become young adults who make different purchasing decisions.
Right. Fantastic. Well, this has been such a great show. And such a wealth of information and resources just in the show itself, let alone what they might find, our audience might find in your book as well. So thank you for sharing so much practical information. We also understand that you have a new practitioner training program available. And I was wondering if you could just briefly tell our audience, because we have a lot of practitioners and might be interested.
Yeah, it is, as we're speaking, relatively brand new. So it's a Healthy Kids, Happy Kids integrative pediatric practitioner membership. And it's for any health professionals who really want to learn how to take more of an integrative and functional approach to pediatrics. And, if you had asked me even 2 years ago, last year, would I ever start a practitioner training or membership? I would have said, no way. Because I mean, for me, I love teaching practitioners, but that was more, I mean, that's why I'm head of A4M. And I would give a huge plug, if you're interested in pediatrics, to go to the A4M Pediatric Symposium. We have it every fall, and I curate, my wish list of speakers, and it's always an amazing conference. It is just pediatric functional and integrative medicine, which is really hard to find in this space, where most functional medicine conferences are 99% to 100% geared towards adult medicine. But the membership, I really started as a way to build community, because it can feel really lonely when you're trying to work with children and not having, a place to bounce ideas off of, a place for Q&As with me. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I just love to share all of my lessons learned so that people don't have to recreate the wheel, and monthly master classes on different topics. And I bring in guest experts, and I teach on topics as the demand arises. So we've spoken about an integrative pediatric approach to ADHD or anxiety, PANS, PANDAS, hay fever, allergic rhinitis, because that's where we are right now. So it's been really fun. I love the practitioners, and I welcome any practitioners who are interested in having a community and learning more.
I hope everybody buys the book, and all you practitioners sign up for that amazing course. Dr. Song, thank you. This went by much too fast. I can't believe we're out of time. But we thank you so much for sharing so much practical information and just being a great communicator and such an advocate for our children. So you're a gem. Thank you so much for everything. And thank you, everybody, for listening. We can't wait to see you next time. And until then, be well.
This episode of the Nourishing You podcast was brought to you by Standard Process. To find out how Standard Process can support your practice, visit standardprocess.com. Don't miss a beat. Find other episodes and subscribe to this podcast on YouTube or check us out on your favorite streaming app. Now available on Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and more. You can also visit nanp.org for more information. Looking for a board-certified holistic nutrition professional to support you on your health journey? Go to nanp.org to get started today. Membership in the NANP provides you with a competitive advantage. Whether you're a current practitioner or a student, we want you to become an active, informed leader of the holistic nutrition community and join our association today. When you're ready to go a step further, you can boost your credibility by becoming board certified in holistic nutrition. Visit nanp.org today to apply. The information on the NANP podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical or legal advice. The NANP is not liable or responsible for any harm, damage, or illness arising from the use of the information contained herein. By listening to the information on this podcast, you agree to defend, indemnify, and hold harmless the NANP and all agents. Copyright NANP, all rights reserved. Until next time, stay nourished.